So the writer and artist Tove Jansson is best known as the creator of the Moomin stories, which were first published in English 60 years ago and have remained in print ever since. She also wrote many books for adults, and the summer book, as I said, it was published 50 years ago. That's why we're celebrating the anniversary. So my guest this evening is Sophia Jansson. It's incredibly exciting. I feel enormously privileged to be here having this conversation. So she is the daughter of the Finnish artist Lars Jansson, as well as Tove Jansson's niece. Growing up at the centre of the collaboration between her aunt and her father, Sophia gained a unique insight into the creative process behind the Moomin books. But it's her particular involvement in the summer book that makes it so nice to be able to talk to her, particularly for this 50th anniversary. So the summer book features a series of stories between a grandmother and a granddaughter who was inspired by Sophia on a small island in the Finnish archipelago. The book was published when Sophia was still a little girl, but I think what's particularly lovely for the 50th anniversary is for anyone who has bought that edition, there is a wonderful afterword written by Sophia, so we'll be speaking more about that. So that's it, that's introduction over. Welcome, Sophia.
Thank you. It's lovely to be part of this event.
Perfect. So I mean, just to begin with the summer book, it's such a loved book, and I know so many people on the call today will have read and reread and gifted it, you know, to many people. But I wonder why you think it is sort of like holds such a special place in people's hearts.
Well, I think everybody can recognize something about themselves in the book. I mean, I think it's about life and death in many senses, and of course, you know, I think we ponder those big questions, each one of us at some point in our lives. And because they're presented here in not, I don't know, in sort of in a way that's very palatable, you can sort of get quite into these themes in a very easy way through the eyes of Sophia, the little girl, and her grandmother. While they experience different things on this tiny little island, and their adventures over the summer months. It's very much like many of Tove's texts, you know, it's not necessarily just what she writes, it's also what happens between the lines, and it's definitely that atmosphere that she creates in the book that I think is tremendously appealing.
No, I agree. And you know, when we organized to do this event, I was, you know, really looking forward to rereading some of my favorites books. And so, you know, I've had a very Tove summer, and something happened to some very dear friends of mine this summer that was incredibly tragic and traumatic. And any other book I was reading, I just had to set aside. And I couldn't watch the TV, and I couldn't read anything else. But I think the gentle episodes of the summer book, and the way, as you say, the space, there's so much space in it, so you can be reflecting as you're reading. It's not you know, it just allows room, I think, for your own thoughts. And so I found tremendous solace in it as well, actually. So I think it sort of offers that as well as the joy, if you know what I mean. It does all of that.
That sounds wonderful. I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, if you haven't read the book, this is a spoiler, but obviously, you know, in the setting on the island, somebody's missing, and it's Sophia's mum. She's just recently died, and obviously Sophia's a little girl, so anybody understands that it's quite you know, basically tragic situation, but in the book it doesn't seem that, and it sort of, it's all about really the wonders of life, which include death, and you know, seen through this little girl's eyes and with someone who literally is at the end of her life. And so I think there's like you say, I mean, there's room for joy and also for reflection about, you know, very, very quite serious themes and serious things.
Definitely. And I think, I don't know, I suppose it's everything that we're talking about, we're framing in a sort of around COVID and the you know, the events of the past few years. But I think the way that people were forced to slow down, I think if you were to reread the summer book, in like, if you haven't done already, if it's something that you read many years ago and then you were to read it now, I think people will really notice the sort of attention to the tiny details in nature, and the things that it just, yeah, I think sort of reading it sort of opens your eyes to the world around you, you know, in a different way, which is well, it feels like a very great gift to a reader, actually, I think, you know. So
well, it's quite interesting, because obviously everything happens on a tiny little island, but when you're reading, it feels like a whole universe. It feels, you know, there's room for everything that you could think of in, you know, those little adventures that they have. And, you know, there's love, hate, death, life. And of course, like you were mentioning, that incredible skill that Tove has to depict nature as if it's really something that's part of who we are. And of course, with great, great love. So you really feel that it's all around these two main characters. And it's really, it has a role of its own, I think, in everything that happens. It's sort of one of the main characters of the book, really.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't know, I think, like you say, the way the nature is a character, I think the way as well that any sort of fears are, I don't know, almost embraced, the way, you know, I think it's the father is depicted as just liking the sea when it's rough and stormy, and, you know, that's when the sort of interesting stuff happens as well, isn't it? So I think, as well as a sort of gentle noticing of nature, I think there's the kind of, you know, allowing yourself to embrace your fears as well. So
yeah, I think it's very much that idea that you have to sort of confront your fears head on to actually get over them. But I mean, I of course know that Tove loved storms too, but I mean, she really got it from her own father, who was a sculptor and couldn't really sculpt in the summertime. And then, you know, good sunny weather, calm weather used to bore him to death and make him terribly irritable. And he was just longing for, you know, the wind to start blowing and for a great storm to come. And when it did, you know, say there was a thunderstorm, he was just filled with energy and adventure lust. And so, of course, he'd take his kids, you know, of course, Tove, with him out in the boat, just because this sense of freedom, you know, amidst the roaring elements around him was just so, I don't know, invigorating. And I think Tove carried that love of storms with her, and I know my father did, and most of the family. And then she, you know, manages to include it in her actual literary work with such precision that, you know, you want to go out in the storm when you read about it.
Of course you do.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, obviously, this, island of the summer book was based on the island. I'm going to just say this. I'm a terrible linguist, Sophia, and I feel like even like I'm going to make a sort of reader's excuse of like when you read words on the page and then you sort of make up your own pronunciations, and then there's probably forever more, and you've already made all those kind of like brain kind of like memory nice thick strands. So please correct me if I say anything like in an abysmal with abysmal pronunciation. But is it Bredskar, the island that it's the summer book is based on?
Yes. Yeah, we would say Bredskar, but yeah, Bredskar is good enough.
Phew. And it's interesting because, I mean, I don't know if it was the desire for sort of like further wildness, but the island that Tove then built her cabin that she then spent so many summers on after that. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about Tove's own island, as it were.
Yeah, I think that, by the 60s, she'd obviously met her great love, Tuulikki Pietilä, her partner, another artist, and the two of them, I think, wanted some privacy, maybe. But also, I think Tove was by then quite well known, and lots of people made demands on her time and wanted to meet her, and she wanted to be left in peace and work. And now you might think that in the summertime, why would she work? But I mean, the summers were very long for her. I mean, they would start beginning of May and end at the end of September. So, there was this growing need to move away from the rest of the family and find a place of their own somewhere in the archipelago. And so together they built, just a tiny cottage, or had built rather, a tiny cottage on an island that's quite extraordinary. No trees, with a big, just rock out in the middle of very outskirts of the Finnish archipelago in the Finnish Gulf. There's a little lagoon in the middle where they used to swim, and lots of birds, seagulls and terns and nesting on the island. But it became their little sanctuary, the place where they could be at peace or left in peace rather. Yeah. And the cottage was basically just one room, and with windows to the four main directions. But as the story goes, ironically, of course, when they were having the house built, they were there, but they couldn't sleep in the cottage because it wasn't ready. So they pitched a tent in what we call the ravine. It was sort of a ravine. And Tove's partner, was very handy with tools, so she built this little, somehow terrace underneath it so that they could have their sleeping bags and everything in the tent. And both of them obviously loved camping and the outdoors. And so when the cottage was actually ready, they loved sleeping in the tent so much because of, all the noises they could hear. And it was just sort of, they were very romantic in a sense, both of them. So they, every summer after that, they pitched the tent in the same place. And if they had guests, the guests would always sleep in the cottage and they would sleep in the tent. In fact, they would probably sleep most nights in the tent, ironically, because it was just more fun and they loved it. So, it just shows that they were a special couple, I would say.
I think a very special couple. And I think, I love that. I absolutely love that. And I know, maybe many people on the call have seen the wonderful film Tove, which I adored, but it stopped too soon. It felt like, it's all about her early life, which obviously is wonderful, but I'm sort of hoping there's going to be a next installment, because the relationship that she had with Tutti was oh, just such, it seemed to be such a great love affair that, well, yeah, I think, I don't know, I hope I speak for lots of people in that we would love to see a film that sort of focuses on their time together and their time on the island like that, because stories like that, I don't know, not many couples could sleep on essentially a bare rock in a tent for, it was something like 30 summers, wasn't it, or something like that, you know.
Yeah, I think they spent almost 30 years there. I think it was 27 or something, and yeah, I don't think they would have actually wanted to leave, but I mean, obviously they got quite old. And I think everybody around them was getting worried that they couldn't really cope. And then they had this sort of scary incident. Their boat was, you know, in a storm, it overturned and sunk. And then Tove writes so beautifully in Notes from an Island, a book about their, you know, their life on the island. Yeah. You know, that whole period when she realizes that, you know, the great love of her life, the sea, you know, she's all of a sudden becomes scared of it. And then they both realize that, you know, they're going to have to face the fact that they have to leave the island at some point. And I know it was extremely traumatic for them. And they dealt with it in slightly different ways. They were quite meticulous about how they did things, how they traveled and how they lived and so, you know, for them, the period on the island had a beginning and it had to have a clear end. So they decided not to come back ever. When they left, they left. And the family was like, oh, but we'll take you there and you can go and visit for a day. And, you know, we know you love it and everything. And they were like, no, we're not, you know. And it must have hurt so much to leave that place because it was just part of them. And you know, there's this story about how they leave in their little boat, Victoria. Both of their fathers was named Victor. So their boat, of course, then boats have female names. So their boat was Victoria. And as they're driving, Tuti was always driving and Tove was at the, you know, bow, sitting in the bow, you know, Tove just looks away from the island as they're driving away and she doesn't turn, not one single time, whereas Tuti has to turn and have a last look at the island. And, you know, it breaks my heart that they never came back. But I mean, somehow it was very them to do it that way. It was so important for them to sort of keep that life they had there intact and not let it be tarnished by, you know, somebody else moving in or taking care of the house or something. They just needed to have a clean ending to it. But yeah, in Notes from an Island, you can read all about it.
Very beautiful Notes from an Island. I mean, it's written with the same feelings and the same space, and but it has Tuti's illustrations, which are beautiful. So it's a really stunning companion read, if you like, isn't it? But I mean, I think it's incredibly brave, as you say, to have left in that way. But one of the things, like from Notes from an Island, is there is a sort of, I mean, I don't know if you'd say this is just the entire island life sort of mentality, but the sort of generosity, because they sort of gifted it for, I don't know, sort of passing fishermen, leaving instructions and, you know, all sorts of, you know, so it was open to others. So although maybe they didn't want to see it, but they, you know, it wasn't like a closed, no one else, you know, no one else is allowed. I don't know. Is that a sort of very island way?
I think it's a very island thing. And also, I mean, some of us remember. I think those of us who are a bit older, I mean, not everybody used to lock their houses before, you know, and especially in the countryside. Nobody locked their houses ever in Finland. You know, houses were always open. And of course, definitely on a remote island, because you'd have fishermen or people, maybe, I don't know, if they had something happened to them while they were out sailing or something and were stranded on the island, they might need to seek shelter in a cabin, or they might, need it. So you tended not to lock. I think the first few years when they were there, they might have locked it, but they had a break-in at one point. And no, actually, they were still there. Yes, they were still living in the cottage, and they had, locked it over the winter. And they had a break-in, and somebody had, needed to make a fire and eat or make food in the cottage, but hadn't replenished the dry wood that was by the stove. And so when they came out, they had a broken window and no wood to, no dry wood to actually heat with. And after that, you'd think, oh, they would have put bars on the windows or something. No, instead they decided to hang the key outside the door with a note saying, the key's right here. Please don't break any windows when you go in. Just go in and please put more firewood if you use it. And it was just such a wonderful thought that, just use a cottage if you need it. If you're in, we just want you to respect it and leave it as you found it. And I think in Finland, where we have something called every man's right, you're allowed to walk in the forest and woods, and you're allowed to camp in almost anywhere. You're not allowed to camp on somebody's backyard. I think that the rule is 50 meters, which is not very much, but so people, at least my generation and previous generations, grew up knowing how to respect nature and, basically if there was a cabin somewhere, you would always clean after yourself and leave it, just as it was when you found it, or even better. And it's in that same vein that they would have thought about the house on the island. So, yeah, it's a nice idea that you should be able to leave your door open.
Of course it is. I'm going to ask a little bit about your memories of island life as a girl, because I was thinking, when I was reading, I was thinking about my own children and how sometimes so many of their memories are sort of framed around photographs that we have. And it's sort of unusual almost for them to sort of go away from the photographs and remember something entirely sort of almost undocumented, if you like. And for your childhood, I know it's a work of fiction, but it's so inspired by you, and not just this book. I think, is it The Dangerous Journey as well, with sort of a little girl very much like you. And I just wondered, do you find your memory is sort of quite closely tied, or do you have other memories sort of that almost are completely opposite to the ones that Tove wrote, as it were?
Obviously, it's difficult to sometimes distinguish between reality and fiction, because, by now, to me, they just sort of, they've merged and become this big, I don't know, memory of a past gone by. But I think it's wonderful that, part of me thinks, oh, has she sort of exploited us or her family for her fiction? But no, she hasn't. I mean, in fact, what she's done, Tove has done us all a great favor, because, for example, my grandmother, I do remember her, but I was 8 when she died. And if it weren't for the summer book, I wouldn't remember as much about her. as I do now, because the stories also awaken all these, memories. And you think of her, like Tove says, when she's, tottering around with her cane. And I'm thinking, I can see it in front of me, her doing that. And of course, there are things that, have never been put in a book and that you just have somewhere on your hard disk, so to speak. And then might never find their ways into a written language. But I think the written language aids your thinking and your memory and your feeling about something, at least for me, that's, tremendously personal. So I think every time I pick up the summer book, I remember something from my childhood that isn't necessarily in the book, but because I just think about those years when I was a child, and it's just, I don't know, a real gift. I think it's absolutely wonderful to have that, and I'm tremendously privileged to have that as a resource for remembering.
Oh, that's very special. Yeah. I don't know. I think there are lots of, I don't know, it's not that we can all have relations who have the genius that Tove did, but I think that's just a sort of reason to just get everyone. We love to write, to document, to sort of, keep all of our stories alive, isn't it? So yeah.
I completely agree with you. I mean, I'm thinking the same. I'm thinking that, yes, there are few who have the real skill to write absolutely beautiful stories. But I mean, most of us have stories to tell. And so, I mean, I'm not very good at it myself, keeping a diary, but I think I would encourage everybody to just write down little things, thoughts, feelings, and some things that can aid your memory. And I never thought I'd forget things, but I find that I do. So it's a good idea to write those little stories as one goes along in life.
Absolutely. And I think as well, one of the very special things about the summer book is the sort of absolute respect for a child and for an older person. And aside from the sort of incident, which I did love, where they missed out on a party, and I think where they left some chocolates or something, aside from that, it makes a sort of middle years seem terribly dull, and like all the fun is to be had at sort of either end, doesn't it? But yeah, no, the idea of respecting a child in the way that Tove sort of gifts, it's sort of almost the power that, she said, I know reading it with an adult's view, but the idea when Sophia conjures a storm seemingly, and it is the same sort of repeated in The Dangerous Journey, isn't it? The child has so much power, and you sort of want to convey that to children as well. That's such a sort of special view, I think,
Yeah, I mean, I think that the lovely thing about the way that Tove portrays the child and the grandmother, obviously they're, because like you say, the middle years, they have to deal with all the practicalities. And really what she's saying, it's the old and the young that have time to play. And they have time to, I don't know, fantasize and play. And you could also say that they're sort of forced to do that, but they're not. Actually, they are the privileged ones. And what happens then is that grandmother and Sophia become equals. And they're completely devoid of all those ideas of, I don't know, some sort of hierarchy of, you know, somebody older or a parent and a child having, you know, different levels of responsibilities, but they become the same age, and they treat each other the same. And I think, you know, because we all know that, you know, small children can have, you know, given the freedom, and they should be given the freedom, the most amazing ideas in their head. And, you know, because they haven't been tarnished by all the constraints that then adult life puts on you. And so they can have these wonderful things going on in their head. And I think what happens here is that, you know, grandmother sort of gets back to that level. You know, she goes back to being a child in a way, even though she's a wise old woman. But I mean, she plays.
Yeah. And
she plays with Sophia. And that's one thing that, you know, I really I'm jealous of Tove and Toti, because all through their life, you know, from the day they met, they played. And that's such a gift. And I think adults play way too little. You know, we take ourselves and life way too seriously. Some of us have to, but it would, you know, the summer book, if anything, and maybe Tove's other books also, could teach each one of us a little bit about maybe also letting ourselves go and play. And that it's not something, you know, I don't know, only for small children.
No, it's not trivial. I think she doesn't, it's not trivialized. No, it's very, wow. It's we want to harness that and be liberated by it, isn't it? To play, as you say.
Yeah.
I wonder, like, if, like, I do imagine that there are people on the call who do have old copies and have maybe bought other books by Tove Jansson because they, you know, they already have a copy of the summer book. But I thought if we could talk a little bit about the afterword that you wrote, because what is very special about it is that you wrote it just describing the time when you became a grandmother for the first time yourself. So I don't know, Sophia, would you like to tell us a bit about that? So.
Well, perhaps not exactly the same island as in the summer book, but there is an island that has featured in my life, all my life. And during the pandemic, obviously, life changed for lots of people, and I think in my afterwards, I am describing a very special 2 weeks during the pandemic, because I had found out that I was going to be a grandmother for the first time, which was absolutely wonderful news. But it was also, you know, the time of the pandemic, and it was the first spring of the pandemic, and people were really quite nervous and hysterical and uncertain about how to be and how to act. And there were all sorts of restrictions put on everybody, not the least being, you know, expectant mothers and newborn babies and so on. So it sort of dawned on me at some point, you know, this terrible truth that I wasn't going to be allowed to see my grandchild or meet my grandchild if I didn't isolate first for 2 weeks. And so that's where the island comes into the picture. You know, then I had to figure out how to isolate. and it happened to be in the spring of 2020. And I was like, I can go to the island. But of course, it was a little bit early. And so this is what I write in I describe in the afterwards, because it has a ring to it, because I become a grandmother and I have a grandchild, and I'm, you know, isolating on this island so that I can meet her. And now in hindsight, I can say it was an absolutely wonderful time seen from a distance now, but at the time, of course, it was quite fraught because, it was, I mean, going to the islands in Finland, we're that far up north, you can't go when the ice is still covering the Finnish Gulf, not to our island anyway, because there's a shipping lane in between, there's a big channel, and you can't cross it unless you have a hovercraft or something. So this was very, very, very early May or very late April. And you can still have ice in the water and it might not be possible to get out there. But of course, I was keeping crossed that. So once the baby was born, we'd made all the preparations. I just went out there and I isolated on the island for 2 weeks. And it's an island with no electricity, no running water, and it's a bit like camping, but I love it. I've always done it. So that wasn't the problem for me, but it is also a place that I love from the bottom of my heart. And, going there every spring is sort of this, absolutely wonderful, like you meet an old friend. Going there, and it just, it's just so important the way it gives me energy, and I really completely understand Tove and Toti, why they went out so early, and my father who went out early to the archipelago, and people that do, because the spring, for one, is an absolutely amazing time to be there. But it's, it just gives you that whole rebirth type of feeling. And so, of course, all of these things happen, rebirth of life, a new baby, and nature's waking up, and I go out there, and it was also bitterly cold. It was, literally, you were alert in all senses. But it just seemed very, there were lots of parallels between that experience and then what happens in the summer book, and then of course becoming a grandmother, sort of the obvious one. But it was a nice subject actually to write about, even though it was basically brought about by not so nice circumstances. It actually led to something quite special in the end.
Well, it is lovely. It's lovely to read. It really is.
Thank you.
And I don't know. I'm worried about the answer to this. So I did want to ask, because so many people really craved space, like, people in apartments in cities, and even just terraces, everything could feel so claustrophobic, particularly during lockdowns. And I remember I was working, we were sort of working like many shops, just trying to keep things going, and I had like a sort of brief window of a few hours off, and I said to my husband, I don't care, I just need to drive to the sea, I just need to see it, like even if we have to turn around and come straight back, I just need to see the sea, and then I can sort of carry on. And we sat in traffic with, I think, 50,000 other people who had the exact same compulsion, because it's like your heart is constricted and you need the sort of space to sort of open up in a way. And I remember that feeling very intensely. But I think my question, and it'll probably be my last, because I can see everybody's questions coming in, so I'm going to get to those now, but it's just about the sort of dream of island life. If I was a young Finn in Helsinki now, could I look to create something similar for my family? I wonder, how many islands is that life? Is that dream? Could I do it?
You could, yeah. You could absolutely. There are, I don't know, 88,000 islands or something like that. Or 60,000. I can't remember how many, but there are very many islands. You could most definitely do it. I mean, it would be hard for anybody to recreate Tove's life, but if your dream is to live on an island, it's doable. You might have to learn Finnish.
Yes. Well, just that fact, because so much of the UK feels closed. There's sort of not enough space. There's not enough. So that is a very, very heartening answer. So thank you, Sophia. Right, I'm going to come to your questions. So I'm going to just go through them. I'm going to go through them in the order that they've arrived. So I'm going to begin with someone from Kerry Meach. And her question is, what do you think Tove's legacy has been, both in the world of literature and art? And there's a bracket. She says, on a personal note, we named our daughter, born in February 2020 after her, and she's very much a free spirit. So, wow.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, what a nice thing to hear. Well, I think that Tove's legacy is really, well, I mean, lots of people can analyze this from different points of view, but for me, it would really be about how all of her work is really permeated by her belief in tolerance towards others and respect for others, and that includes nature. And how, you know, the most important thing really in life is to be kind to your fellow kin and or fellow person. And I mean, she does this just by writing it from different angles in her short stories about human relationships and, you know, all of those things that you encounter in life that are not necessarily easy. But if you make the effort, there is a solution that is a non-violent, a peaceful one. And I mean, the Moomin stories are obviously about this. She doesn't shy away from the dark side of things, but the way they encounter what comes is the key, that it's about your attitude. And I think we all need it desperately still, which is unfortunate. I mean, she obviously wrote in a war-torn world with a dream of a better world. And I'm sad to say, you know, 60, 70 years on, we still need that better world. And so I think her legacy is really about writing about universal values and universal themes that seem to touch everybody that reads on a tremendously personal level. Yet they're about something we all recognize. So I think that's well, a short answer, but something like that.
That's lovely. Thank you, Sophia. Okay, so the next question is from Lucy Stewart. Does the way your family comes across in letters from Tove align with the versions of them that you knew?
Oh, very much indeed. Yeah, I think the wonderful thing about the book Letters from Tove is that, you know, there's been a lot written about her work, and there are biographies, there's been a lot written about her, but in Letters from Tove, you hear her own voice. And it's just so wonderful, because I'm thinking, oh, nobody's analyzing or making assumptions or anything. She's telling you, the reader, exactly what she feels and how she sees things. And yeah, again, you have to read between the lines too. But I mean, I just love the letters, really.
Wonderful. Okay, so Lucy Russell, she asks, would Tove talk about the book in the years after it was published? So the summer book, and what did it mean to her?
I might be terribly biased here and just have a selective memory, but I believe that she said that it was absolutely, of her work, it was one of her favorite books. And my interpretation maybe is that because, of course, it's a fantastic homage to her mother that she loved very much and with whom she had an incredibly close relationship. You know, there's a wonderful photograph of Tove when she's about, I don't know, 2, 3, and she's sitting in her mother's lap drawing. And of course, her mother was also an artist, and it's that closeness she carries with her and that relationship until the end, when her mother dies. And so her mother was an incredibly important person for her. And this book is really mostly also about Tove's mom, you know. So it's I do understand if it was one of her favorite ones.
Thank you. Okay, so this is from Julie Reed. How closely do the characters of and relationship between the little girl and the grandmother resemble you and your grandmother?
Now, see, if I had a perfect memory, then I could tell you. I think, as I mentioned before, obviously my memories are a bit tinted by what I've read in the summer book, but yes, the summer book is part, of course, invented, and part Tove's own childhood, and then part maybe my relationship with my grandmother. And so I would say it resembles my relationship to my grandmother a great deal. But that isn't really the point. The point is the way Tove crafts those stories and the way she tells them, because they become quite significant. Now, in reality, whether or not a little incident between my grandmother and myself would have been that significant, I can't tell you. But it's the skill that Tove as an author has to retell or to tell in her own words a fictionalized account of something in such a way that you think, oh, you know, this must be real. That is really what's important.
Thank you. Right, Sue Lindop says, this is not a question, but she read all the Moomin books when she was 70 and just couldn't leave them alone, and she will read them again soon. So she says to thank you for this magical evening. So.
Oh, thank you very much. What a lovely thing to say. Oh, thank you.
Okay, so the next question is from Sandra McDonald. And she says there's a cat in the summer book. Did they take it out there with them? And did Tove have a cat that she took out to the island?
Tove most definitely had a cat. And she took it, actually, Tove and Toti, her partner, had a cat. And her name was Sipsina. And they took her with them to their island where they built the cottage, and Beepsor lived there till she died with them, and she was much loved. And there are some photographs of Tove where you can see her with the cat in her lap, and she absolutely adored cats. I think they both did. Now the cat in the summer book, because cats have featured in Tove's life always, I'm not entirely sure whether or not that was sort of depicted from her own childhood, or whether it's an invented story. We never had a cat on the island. when I was a child. So it's definitely not one she's taken from my childhood, but it could be from her own, or then it's a story. I mean, I think there's a wonderful bit in the story about the cat where, you know, Sophia gets quite upset with the cat, and then her grandmother says, so what are you going to do? And she says, she's going to love it just even more. You know, she's going to basically force her love on it. And I think that's a wonderful thing to, you know, a wonderful idea.
When the cats get
swapped, if the cat doesn't love you back, you're just going to love it more.
It's beautiful. And I love how the cats get swapped, and it's almost back to the storms and the calm weather, and the calm cat is far too boring, isn't it? And she wants the wild cat back again.
Yeah. Because the calm cat has no personality at all. And really, it's much better with the one that's difficult, and that you actually, you know, basically have some sort of discussion with, I suppose. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Sophia. Okay, Dan French says, thank you so much for this. I always found it fascinating that the father figure in the book is very much only in the background and never speaks. It's as if he's more part of their island experience and the landscape and the elements. I'm curious to know if Sophia has any thoughts about this distant portrayal of him. Was it a deliberate focus on the two female characters?
I think Tove probably crafted the stories quite carefully and made choices. And I think her choice was to not have too many characters, because she really wanted to focus on the relationship between the grandmother and Sophia, and sort of basically let them have the dialogue throughout the book, and the other characters to be, you know, just part of, you know, the setting in the background. I think it's also much more effective as a way to structure the stories, because if Sophia's father had been more had a bigger part in the stories, she would have had to put words in his mouth, and then inevitably you would have had to have more of the discussion about the dead mother and so on and so forth. This way, I think the balance of the book is changed so that it is in essence a very life-affirming book, you know. And as we were discussing before, I mean, it gives the two main characters the freedom to kind of, you know, do what they want and play and kind of take life into their own hands. And I think it's very clever to do it that way. And I don't think it's by chance. I do think that Tove always crafted her stories extremely carefully.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sophia. Okay. Carol, Carol, I'm sorry with your surname. I'm going to say Closey, but maybe that's wrong. Is the shape of the Moomins inspired by the rocks in that area?
Oh, that's an interesting one. You mean beautiful round rocks? Well, could be. Yeah. I'll say yes to that. But just as a sort of side note, the Moomins as a visual manifestation have had many different shapes from beginning to how she in the end decided that she would draw them. So when she first draws something that resembles a Moomin troll, they're actually called snorks, and they are kind of little signature figures in her other illustrations. And then eventually she uses those signature figures in Moomins and the Great Flood, the first Moomin story. And there they are still quite elongated, and they have long noses, and they don't look as round and friendly as they then gradually become. And if you read her books in order, it's quite a fun exercise to actually, you know, look at the illustrations and see how they change from book to book. And at which point she sort of decides, okay, well, this is the final shape I'm going to stick with. And then she sticks with that shape in the later books as well. And I think we talk a lot about her writing here, but I mean, because she trained as, you know, a painter and an illustrator, she took immense care in, you know, her illustrations to get it right. We know for a fact that, you know, for some books, she will draw an illustration, say 10, 12 times. And to the naked eye, you don't see that many differences, but she chooses the one that in her eye is perfect and sends that on to the publisher to have it put into the book. So she was very, very careful about also, you know, her line and the atmosphere in the illustrations. So Tove is very much about composition. But yeah, about the Moomin Trolls, yeah, I mean, I'm quite happy she, in the end, made them round and sort of big noses and friendly looking with tails and short legs, and not because it fits, I think, with the fact that they are essentially very friendly beings.
Thank you, Sophia. Okay, I think this might have to be our last question. So Maria Kramer asks, do you have a favorite part of the summer book? And if you do, has it changed over the years?
Do I have a favorite part of the summer book? Yeah, I do like the discussion that Sophia and grandmother are having about hell and, you know, heaven and hell, because then, you know, Sophia catches grandmother out and, you know, and she swears, and then they talk about hell. And in the bit about hell, you know, she said, Sophia says that, you know, she says to grandma, well, you just told me there is no hell. How can you? And then actually the discussion is about angels and you know, and then grandmother is a bit stumped. And then she says, you know, well, you know, you can believe what you like, but I'm going to believe this. And I sort of, I love it because they're so equal. You know, it's not like grandmother knows how it is and Sophia is learning. And I mean, they sort of both know how it is in a sense. And they, you know, somehow just having to agree on something they disagree on, you know, which is wonderful.
I mean, I think that's a lovely place to end, because like you say, there's no distance between them. And yeah, it sums up that very, very special relationship that is documented and crafted and created so beautifully in this book that we all love. So, so yeah, I know a few people have said, like, thanks, and to pass on their thanks to you, Sophia. And, you know, I have to thank you. I have to thank you on behalf of everybody, you know, all the
loving me.
Oh, it's been such a joy. I think, you know, on behalf of everybody who shops in independent bookshops, everybody who shops on bookshop.org, it's been an immense privilege for us all to listen to you this evening. So thank you so much, Sophia. Thank you.
Thank you to everybody who's been listening, and thank you so much to you, Fleur, and everybody who's made this possible. It's been a really nice hour.
Well, thank you and goodbye.
Goodbye. Lovely to be here. Okay, bye.
Bye.